The Grand Assembly Hall was larger than anything John had ever seen. The roof shimmered like liquid gold, supported by giant silver columns that stretched so high he could barely see their tops. The air was heavy with the scent of strange flowers and burning incense. Thousands of alien eyes stared down at him from rows of curved balconies. Some eyes were bright and glowing, others dark and sharp like a hawk's. But every gaze carried the same look out. Whispers filled the hall. Some were amused, some were cruel. A deep voice rumbled from the far balcony. "This is humanity's champion." The words carried through the chamber like a challenge. Others repeated them, mocking, as if the title itself was a joke. Laughter followed, slow at first, then spreading through the crowd like wildfire. John didn't move. He stood in the center of the polished black stone floor, wearing nothing but a simple traveler's coat, leather boots, and a small pack slung over his shoulder. No gleaming armor, no advanced weapons, no scars to show great battles. Compared to the massive reptilian warriors with steel-plated hides, or the insect-like gladiators with blade arms, he looked like nothing special. The announcer's voice echoed from the high platform at the front. Champion John Carter of Earth, first human to stand in the trial of ascendancy. The title sounded impressive, but the reaction from the audience said otherwise. They leaned forward to get a better look at him, not out of respect, but curiosity. Many had never seen a human before. The last time Earth had been spoken of in the galaxy's Great Council was over a century ago, and even then, humans were considered weak, isolated, and unimportant. From the royal balcony on the left, 3 powerful alien women watched closely. Queen Lareva of the Storm Realms, tall and radiant, her hair a cascade of silver threads, sat like a statue carved from moonlight. Next to her, General Kara, muscles like carved stone, a scar across her cheek, and eyes that could freeze an army rest, her gauntlet hands on the railing. On the right side of the hall, High Priestess Fira, dressed in flowing black and gold robes, her skin shimmering with faint light, studied him with an unreadable expression. John could feel their stares, but he didn't meet their eyes. Instead, he glanced at the floor, then at the huge gate at the far end, the one that would open to the trial arena. He took a deep breath, steady and slow. A lizard-like champion, 2 heads taller than John, stepped beside him, grinning with sharp teeth. "Go home, human," the alien said in a low growl. "The trial will kill you before the first moon sets." John didn't answer. He had learned a long time ago that in places like this, words didn't win respects, survival did. The announcer raised his hand for silence. By the will of the council, the trial of ascendancy begins. All champions will face the Valley of Storms. Only the strong will survive. Glory to the victor. The massive gate groaned open, revealing a dark path, leading into a valley where black clouds swirled like boiling ink. Lightning flashed in the distance, striking the ground with deafening cracks. The air smelled of rain and burnt stone. The moment the gate was fully open, the other champions surged forward, roaring, stomping, eager to prove themselves. John waited until the rush passed before he moved, walking at a calm, steady pace. The crowd jeered at his slowness. From the balconies, some shook their heads, others laughed, too afraid to run. One voice shouted, "He will be the first to fall." But John wasn't afraid. He had studied the trial's history, listened to old recordings, and noticed something the others didn't. The Valley of Storms didn't just kill with lightning and wind. It killed those who ran too fast, too recklessly, without thinking. As he stepped into the valley, the ground shook under his boots. Wind tore at his coat. Lightning struck so close that the air burned hot for a moment before cooling again. The path ahead twisted, slick with rain. The others were already far ahead, tiny shapes in the storm. John paused, scanning the cliff walls. There, just visible through the mist, was a narrow ledge that seemed to curve along the valley's edge. It wasn't part of the official path. It looked dangerous, but it also looked shorter. A part of him wanted to rush after the others, but he forced himself to breathe and think. Every muscle in his body told him that this was a test of more than strength. It was a test of survival, of choices. And if the galaxy thought he was weak, fine. They would learn the truth soon enough. Far above, Queen Lareva leaned forward in her seat. "He walks like he's not afraid of death," she murmured to the general beside her. General Kara smirked. "Or he's too foolish to know it's coming." The high priestess said nothing, but her eyes narrowed in interest. John stepped onto the narrow ledge. The stone was slick, and the drop below was so far he couldn't see the bottom. One wrong move, and the trial would end before it began. But he kept moving, slow and careful, his hand brushing against the cliff wall for balance. Behind him, the crowd's laughter faded into quiet murmurs. For the first time that day, they weren't mocking. They were watching, and somewhere in the storm, something ancient and dangerous was waiting for them all. The Valley of Storms lived up to its name. The wind roared like 1,000 angry beasts, tearing at John's coat and threatening to throw him off the cliff with every step. Rain stung his face like needles, and the lightning was so bright it burned white spots into his vision. Each strike came with a blast of heat, followed by the sharp scent of scorched stone. Far ahead, the main group of champions ran on the wide central path, pushing through the chaos. They looked powerful shapes with glowing shields, armored hides, and weapons that hummed with alien energy. But already, John could see some of them stumbling. A few moved too quickly, slipped, and were forced to crawl back to their feet as the storm tore at them. The narrow ledge he had chosen was dangerous, but it offered one advantage: cover. The cliff wall shielded him from the worst of the wind, and the path curved in a way that kept him out of sight from most of the crowd above. Still, it wasn't easy. Loose stones skittered under his boots. More than once, he had to press himself against the cliff to avoid a gust that threatened to hurl him into the abyss. At one point, a jagged crack of lightning struck the rock just ahead of him, filling the air with the blinding glow of molten stone. John waited for his vision to return before moving again. The trial wasn't about speed, at least, not for him. It was about staying alive. Behind him, the laughter from the assembly hall was gone now. The audience leaned forward, following his slow but steady progress on the giant viewing screens above the valley from the royal balconies. The three powerful alien women continued to watch. Queen Lareva spoke first, not trying to beat them in a race, she observed. General Kara grunted. "Then he will lose." But the High Priestess Vera's voice was quiet and certain. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the others will destroy themselves before he ever needs to fight them." As if to prove her point, a scream echoed from the main path. The camera shifted to show one of the insectoid gladiators sprawled across the stones, his bladed arm bent at an impossible angle. Two others tripped over him, tumbling into the raging wind. A bright flash lit the sky, and when the light faded, they were gone. John didn't look back. He kept moving. The ledge eventually narrowed until it was barely the width of his boots. Ahead, it ended in a broken section where part of the cliff had collapsed into the abyss. The gap wasn't wide, maybe 2 meters, but the wind made it dangerous. He crouched low, testing his footing. The storm howled around him. He knew that cameras were probably zooming in, the crowd holding its breath to see if the weak human would finally fail. He didn't give them the satisfaction. With one deep breath, he leaped. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then his boots hit the other side, skidding on the slick stone. He slammed a hand against the wall for balance, heart pounding, but he didn't fall. From somewhere far above, there was a sound he hadn't heard yet: applause. Not much, but enough for him to notice. The ledge curved back toward the main path, And as he stepped onto it again, he saw something that made him slow. One of the reptilian warriors, massive, scaled, and armored, was pinned beneath a fallen slab of rock. The storm had loosened it from the cliff above. The warrior's legs were trapped, and the others ran past without a second glance. John's first instinct was to keep moving. Every second wasted here could put him in last place. But then he remembered the way the crowd had sneered when they saw him. The way the alien queens had looked down on him. He walked past now. He'd be proving them right that humans were selfish survivors and nothing more. He dropped his pack and dug his boots into the stone. "Hold still," he shouted over the wind. The warrior glared at him with slit-pupil eyes, but didn't refuse. Together, they pushed against the rock. It didn't budge. John shifted position, using the storm's wind like a lever, and the slab rolled just enough for the reptilian to pull free. The warrior stared at him for a long moment, then gave a short nod before vanishing into the storm. By the time John reached the checkpoint at the end of the valley, more than half the competitors were gone, taken by the wind, lightning, or exhaustion. He wasn't first, but he wasn't last either. The announcer's voice boomed over the hall's speakers. Unexpected progress from the human champion. Against all odds, he endures. From her balcony, Queen Lareva's lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. Perhaps he is worth watching after all. The High Priestess's golden eyes glimmered. Yes, I think this one might surprise us. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen by the crowd, other champions whispered about him, not as prey anymore, but as a threat. By the time John left the Valley of Storms, his coat was soaked through, his hair plastered to his head, and his hands scraped raw from gripping stone. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the strongest, but he was still standing in this trial. So that meant everything. The checkpoint was a circular platform of carved stone, sheltered by high walls that blocked the wind. A few alien healers waited there, offering water and medical care to the survivors. Most of the remaining champions dropped to their knees, gulping water like they hadn't tasted it in days. John didn't sit. He stood near the edge of the platform, scanning the horizon. The next stage stretched ahead, a jagged maze of black rock spires, rising from the desert like the teeth of some long-dead giant. The path between them twisted in all directions, with shadows hiding whatever dangers waited inside, high above. The royal balconies leaned forward to watch. The three most powerful women in the hall had not looked away since the human entered the valley, Queen Lareva. Her silver hair flowing like moonlight over her shoulders rested her chin on her hand. "He's not reckless," she said softly. "That's rare for a champion." General Kara folded her arms, her scar catching the light. "He moves like a soldier who's been in too many wars, but he doesn't carry himself like a killer." "Hi." Priestess Vera said nothing, but her golden eyes were locked on him. She had seen that moment in the valley when John stopped to help the reptilian warrior. No one had ever done that in the trial's history. On the platform, whispers spread among the surviving champions. Some were grudging. The humans still alive. He should have been blown off the cliffs in the first hour. Others were sharper, edged with warning. He's hiding something. He's not here to win the crown. He's here for something else. Okay. John ignored them. He knew how predators thought if you gave them attention, they'd come closer. Better to keep his focus forward. The announcer's voice thundered over the hall. Stage 2 begins. The maze of blades awaits. Many enter. Few leave. The gates opened. A wave of heat hit them immediately. The desert sun was a white glare overhead, and the black spires radiated stored heat like ovens. As the champions stepped inside, the walls seemed to close in. John moved at a steady pace, noting every shadow, every change in the wind. He could hear the others rushing ahead, their footsteps echoing off the stone. Some paths ended in dead ends, Others led to sharp drops into pits lined with jagged crystal spikes. Halfway through, he heard its soft, controlled footsteps behind him. He didn't look right away, but when he turned the corner, he caught sight. Of her, it was the insectoid champion he'd seen earlier, the one who had mocked him in the valley. Her 4 arms held curved blades, and her eyes glinted with something between amusement and hunger. "You move slowly, human," she hissed, voice clicking with each word. "It will make you easy to kill." John didn't stop walking. "Then why are you still following me?" Her mandibles twitched. "Because I want to see how long you can pretend to be calm before you beg for mercy." She lunged without warning. John sidestepped, letting her blades slam into the stone wall with a shriek of sparks. He didn't try to overpower her, he knew he couldn't. Instead, he used the maze itself, weaving between the narrow gaps until her own size slowed her down. Twice, she tried to corner him, but both times he slipped away, never breaking his steady rhythm. Finally, she stopped chasing. Her voice followed him, low and grudging. "Perhaps you are not as weak as you look." John didn't answer. He kept moving until her footsteps faded. Back in the assembly hall, the audience was no longer laughing. Some leaned forward in their seats, watching the human with interest. The screens showed every choice he made, never rushing, never panicking, always looking for the next safe path. From her balcony, Queen Lareva spoke again. "Do you see? He uses his mind before his strength. That is why he survives." General Kara gave a small, reluctant nod. "If he were in my army, I would not put him on the front line. I would put him where the enemy least expects and watch him win." High Priestess Vera's lips curved into the faintest smile. He will change this trial before it ends. By the time John reached the exit of the maze of blades, several more champions were gone, trapped, injured, or lost. He stepped out into the sunlight, breathing hard but uninjured. The healers offered him water again. This time, he accepted. As he drank, he noticed something. Some of the other champions weren't just avoiding him. They were watching him with caution. The sneers were gone. The whispers had changed. Now, they were the kind of whispers predators used when they realized their prey might have teeth. The sun had fallen behind the jagged black spires, leaving the desert in a dim red glow. The air was cooler now, but the heat of the day still rose from the stone like the breath of some sleeping beast. The checkpoint for the night was a wide plateau surrounded by sheer drops on 3 sides, with a single narrow path leading in and out. Tents of woven alien fabric stood in a loose circle around a central fire pit. The healers had left water jars and simple food, dried meat, fruit, and a thick bread that smelled faintly sweet. The champions who had survived the second stage ate in silence, each keeping their own space. John sat near the edge of the plateau, away from the firelight. He preferred to see the stars. They were strange out here, larger and brighter than back on Earth, with a faint purple haze drifting between them. Somewhere, far beyond those lights, his home was just a small blue dot. He was thinking about that. When the sound of footsteps approached from behind, "You sit far from the others," a voice said. John didn't turn right away. When he did, he saw the reptilian warrior he had freed from the rock in the Valley of Storms. The alien's scaled armor gleamed faintly in the starlight. "Easier to rest when no one's breathing down your neck," John replied. The reptilian studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You saved my life. That is a debt I do not forget. But be careful. Not all here share my sense of honor." John's gaze sharpened, meaning. The warrior's slit-pupil eyes shifted toward the tents. 3 of them have been speaking in whispers since we arrived. They are not planning for the next stage. They are planning for you. John didn't show any surprise. Let them plan. The reptilian gave a small growl of approval and moved back toward the camp. Hours later, most of the plateau was silent. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. John lay on his back, eyes half closed, but his mind alert. He had learned long. That danger came when people thought you were asleep. The first sign was the faint scrape of leather on stone. Then another. Then 3 shadows detached themselves from the darkness beyond the tents and crept toward him. He recognized them, too tall. Wolf-like warriors from the northern clans and a broad-shouldered avian fighter whose beak glinted in the moonlight. They carried no weapons, but their claws and strength were enough to kill. The avian was first to speak, voice low and sharp. "You have no place here, human. You survive because you hide behind tricks. Tonight, you fall." John sat up slowly. Saying nothing, one of the wolfmen lunged. John rolled aside, letting the alien's own momentum carry him forward. He grabbed a loose stone from the ground and slammed it into the wolfman's knee. The warrior howled in pain, stumbling. The second attacker came from the side. John ducked under a swinging claw and drove his shoulder into the alien's ribs, knocking him back toward the cliff's edge. The avian moved faster, his talons slashing at John's face. John caught his wrist and twisted, forcing the alien to drop to one knee. The wolfmen recovered and circled him, growling. For a few tense moments, they all moved slowly, testing each other. The camp was still silent either. No one had noticed the fight, or no one cared to stop it. Then the reptilian warrior appeared. He stepped between John and the attackers, his long tail lashing the ground. 3 against 1 is not a trial, he said, voice rumbling. It is cowardice, the avian sneered. Stay out of this. The reptilian took a single step forward, and something in his stance made all 3 attackers hesitate. Slowly. With low growls and glares, they backed away into the shadows. John exhaled, rubbing the side of his jaw. You didn't have to do that. The reptilian shrugged. A debt is a debt. And you fight like a small beast that refuses to die. I respect that. From high above, the royal balconies had seen everything. The trial grounds were watched at all hours, and the hidden cameras had caught the fight clearly. Queen Lareva's lips curved faintly. He is attacked in the dark, yet still he stands. And he earns allies not through fear, but through loyalty. General Kara's eyes narrowed. If 3 warriors can't bring him down, he is more dangerous than I thought. Hi. Priestess Vera leaned forward, golden eyes locked on the human. He is no longer just surviving the trial. He is shaping it. Back on the plateau, John settled against the cliff wall once more. The stars seemed brighter now, but so did the tension in the air. He knew the next stage wouldn't just be about danger from the environment, it would be about danger from the others who wanted him gone before the finish. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought formed: if they're this desperate already, I must be doing something right. Asterisk, asterisk, the dawn over the trial grounds came in a blaze of deep red and gold. The plateau's shadows stretched long across the sand, and the air carried the sharp, cold bite of morning. John woke before the others, rolling up the thin blanket the healers had given him. Sleep had been light, broken by the memory of last night's attack, by the time the other champions stirred. The announcer's voice thundered across the valley. Stage 3 begins. The fire caves await. Only those who endure heat and flame shall move forward. A low murmur went through the camp. Everyone knew the fire caves were the most feared stage. They were a labyrinth beneath the mountains, where rivers of molten rock lit the darkness like liquid fire. The heat alone could kill those unprepared. The caves were also unstable. Collapses were common, and the poisonous gases inside could choke the breath from even the strongest lungs. The gate at the far side of the plateau ground open, revealing a narrow path into the mountains. Steam hissed from cracks in the stone. The air smelled faintly of metal and ash. John adjusted the straps of his pack and stepped forward with the rest. He didn't rush. The reptilian warrior who had stood by him last night fell into step beside him. "You saved me once, last night. I repaid that. Now we are even. Inside the caves, you will be alone." John nodded. "That's how I prefer it." The entrance swallowed them into darkness. Immediately, the air grew heavy and hot. Every breath felt thick, as if the cave was trying to slow them down. The walls glowed faintly from the rivers of lava running in deep channels below, their light flickering across the jagged ceiling. Some champions sprinted ahead, desperate to get through quickly. John did not. He moved carefully, stepping only. On the black stone paths between the molten flows, the heat was intense enough to make the air shimmer. But he forced himself to stay calm. Half an hour in, a scream echoed through the tunnels. One of the wolf-like warriors from last night's ambush had stepped too close to the edge of a lava channel. His foot slipped, and in moments the fire swallowed him. The smell of burning fur and flesh filled the air. John didn't stop moving. Deeper. Into the caves, the tunnels grew tighter, the heat more unbearable. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. His shirt clung to him like a second skin. He was just rounding a corner when he saw Hertha's smallest competitor in the trial. A thin avian girl, barely taller than his shoulder. Her wings were scorched, and she was slumped against the wall, breathing in ragged gasps. The smart thing would be to keep walking. Every second here meant more time in the suffocating heat. But John knelt beside her anyway. "Can you stand?" he asked. She shook her head weakly. "Gas in the next tunnel. Too thick." John pulled a strip of cloth from his pack, poured water over it, and tied it around her beak. "Breathe through this. Stay low. I'll guide you." With his hand on her back, they moved together, crouching through the narrow tunnel. The air inside was heavy with poisonous fumes, enough to make John's head spin. But he kept going until the tunnel opened into a wide chamber where the air was clearer. She collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. "Why help me? I am your rival." John smiled faintly. "Because I'm human." The moment was caught by the cameras and broadcast live to the assembly hall. The audience murmured. Some looked confused, others intrigued. From her balcony, Queen Lareva tilted her head. "He risks himself for another, even when it gains him nothing." General Kara's jaw tightened. "It gains him loyalty. That is more dangerous than strength." Priestess Vera's voice was soft but certain. "It gains him something greater still, power over hearts." Hours later, John emerged from the caves. His clothes were singed, his boots coated in ash, but he was alive. And he wasn't alone. The avian girl followed, wings drooping but eyes bright with gratitude. The healers rushed forward to check them. The other champions stared as if seeing John for the first time. Some had respect in their eyes. Others had fear. The announcer's voice rang out again. "Champion John Carter completes the fire caves, with another survivor at his side. A first in trial history." The crowd erupted not in laughter, but in cheers. For the first time, John saw the royal balconies clearly. All three of the most powerful alien women were on their feet. Their eyes were not mocking now, they were measuring him. Something had shifted. He wasn't just surviving the trial anymore. He was winning the galaxy's attention. The assembly hall was louder than it had been since the trial began. The air buzzed with voices, some excited, some outraged, as the remaining champions stood in the center of the polished black stone floor. The day's stage was over. The survivors had gathered for the evening's announcement. John stood quietly among them, his coat now patched in several places, boots coated in the dust of the fire caves. He could feel the weight of 1,000 alien eyes on him. This time, the stares were not mocking. The announcer's deep voice rolled across the hall. Stage 3 has ended. Only 12 champions remain. Tomorrow, the final trial begins. The crowd erupted into cheers, but the announcer raised a hand for silence. Before we dismiss, the council recognizes the unprecedented actions of one champion, John Carter of Earth, who not only survived the Valley of Storms, the Maze of Blades, and the Fire Caves, but saved the lives of fellow competitors along the way. Gasps and murmurs followed. John kept his expression neutral. He didn't care for speeches, but the sudden shift in tone was impossible to miss. Then, without warning, movement came from the highest balcony. Queen Lareva rose from her seat. The silver threads of her hair caught the golden light as she stepped to the railing. Her voice carried effortlessly across the hall. "John Carter," she said, "your courage and cunning have impressed me. You stand where many of my finest warriors have fallen. By the law of the Storm Realms, I claim you as my consort. You will stand beside me as king." The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to John. But before he could speak, General Kara stood from her seat in the opposite balcony. The steel plates on her shoulders glinted as she glared across at the queen. "No, Lareva. Me is a warrior's soul, not a court ornament. By the honor of the Crimson Legions, I claim him as my mate. He will lead my armies." The crowd erupted. In shock, some shouted approval, others hissed in outrage. And then, the third voice came. High Priestess Vera did not stand immediately. She simply looked down at John with her golden eyes, a small smile on her lips. When she spoke, her voice was calm. It silenced the room more completely than any shout. "Both of you are late. By the binding rights of my order, I have already marked him as mine. His spirit carries the blessing of the eternal flame, and by our oldest law, he belongs with me." The hall exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted from their balconies. The other champions stared at John in disbelief. Even the announcer was momentarily speechless. From his place on the floor, John felt the air tighten. He understood enough about politics to realize this wasn't just about him. The three most powerful women in the galaxy, each with armies, fleets, and influence, were now in open competition over one human. The reptilian warrior from earlier muttered under his breath, "You've started a war without drawing a sword." The announcer finally regained his voice. By the council's code, disputes of claim are settled before the final trial begins. The champion must choose. A hush fell over the hall. Every eye locked on John. The three women stared down at him. Each waiting, John glanced from one to the other. Queen Lareva, beautiful and commanding, with the power of entire star systems in her grasp. General Kara, fierce and loyal, with the strength to crush armies. High Priestess Vera, mysterious and wise, with the influence to bend the galaxies. Faith, choosing one would mean rejecting the other two. And perhaps starting a war that could destroy everything he'd fought for. His mind worked quickly. If I choose one, the others will see me as an enemy. If I choose none, I'll be dead before the trial ends. So, there's only one move left. John straightened, his voice carrying clearly. If you truly wish to claim me, then you must claim each other as well. I will not be the prize that divides you. Why will be the bond that unites you? I will marry all three. For a long, tense moment, there was only silence. Then gasps. Then stunned laughter. Some called it madness, others genius. On the balconies, the three women looked at each other, not with the fury of rivals, but with the slow calculation of leaders who had just been given a way to combine their power without losing face. Queen Lareva's lips curved into a smile. Bold. General Kara chuckled. Only a fool or a great man would say such a thing. High Priestess Farah's eyes gleamed. Perhaps humanity has more to teach us than we thought. The crowd roared. For the first time, the sneer, "In this is humanity's champion," was gone. The morning of the final trial dawned under a strange, heavy sky. Dark clouds swirled far above the trial grounds, but they didn't move with the wind. They hung in place, glowing faintly, as if watching what was about to happen. John stood at the edge of the great arena. The other 11 champions spread out. Beside him, across from them, the wide gates slowly began to rise. The announcer's voice echoed through the assembly hall. This is the last stage. The trial of unity. Those who stand alone will fail. Those who work together will survive. Murmur of confusion ran through the crowd. The previous trials had tested strength, speed, and survival, but this was different. The gate finished rising, revealing a battlefield unlike any John had seen before. It wasn't just an open space. It was a shifting ground of floating stone platforms suspended over a chasm that seemed bottomless. Gaps opened and closed as the platforms drifted apart, some spinning slowly, others shaking as if ready to fall. Beyond the platforms, massive dark shapes moved, creatures with glowing red eyes and too many limbs to count. Their claws were long, enough to split stone, and their shrieks shook the air. The announcer spoke again. The only way forward is together. The signal horn blew, and chaos erupted. Some champions leaped forward immediately, hopping across the platforms with reckless speed. Others hung back, scanning the dangers ahead. John did neither. He stepped forward at a steady pace, eyes moving from the shifting stones to the creatures beyond. He had learned something in every stage: patience in the valley, observation in the maze, endurance in the caves. Now all of that had to come together. The reptilian warrior from before landed beside him on the first platform. "This is not a race," he said. "No," John replied. "It's a test." A wolf-like champion tried to leap past them, but misjudged the distance. He would have fallen if John hadn't caught his arm, hauling him back onto the platform. Wolfman froze, shocked. "Don't thank me," John said. "Just don't waste the second chance." As they moved forward, the platforms grew more unstable. Twice, John pulled others to safety. 3 times, he warned the group about a weak stone before anyone stepped on it. Slowly, the surviving champions began to listen to his calls, shifting their movements to match his pace. The creatures reached them halfway through the crossing. Massive claws slammed into the platforms, sending chunks of stone into the abyss. One of the insectoid champions screamed as a claw wrapped around her leg, but John was already there, driving the point of his boot into the creature's joint until it released her. The others rallied to help, striking together, pushing the beasts back long enough to move to the next safe platform. From the balconies above, the crowd had gone silent. They weren't watching separate fighters anymore. They were watching something they'd never seen in the history of the trial: the champions moving as one, with a human at the center, calling every move. Queen Lareva leaned forward. He commands them without ordering them. They follow because they trust him. General Kara's scarred lips curved into a rare smile. "I would follow him too." High Priestess Farah's golden eyes glimmered. "And that is why he must lead all of us." At last, the final platform came into sight, a huge slab of white stone, glowing faintly in the light. All the remaining champions reached it together. When they stepped onto it, the platforms behind them crumbled, falling into the abyss. The announcer's voice thundered. "The trial of ascendancy is complete." And for the first time in recorded history, a human stands at its center. The cheers that followed shook the hall. John stood still for a moment, letting it sink in. When he finally looked up, the three most powerful women in the galaxy were no longer rivals glaring at each other. They stood side by side. The queen spoke first. "By the storm realms, I name you king." The general stepped forward. "By the crimson legions, I name you commander." The high priestess placed her hand over her heart. "Key by the eternal flame, I name you my equal." And together, in front of the roaring crowd, they repeated the same words. "We name you our husband." Gasps, shouts, and laughter filled the air. Some called it madness. Others called it history. John's voice cut through the noise. "Then let this be the start of something greater than the trial. 3 realms, 3 armies, 3 faiths united, not by war, but by choice. If I am your champion, then I will be a champion for all of you." The hall erupted again. But this time the sound carried something more than excitement. It carried belief. And so, the man they once mocked as "this is humanity's champion" became the one who held the galaxy's most powerful alliance in his hands, not through strength alone, not through fear, but through the one thing no one had expected a human to bring to the trial: unity.